Good evening, friends. Part 2 of this OBE Journal, May 5, 2023. And onward we go. Continuing right along. And where do I go after that lower astral thing? Obviously not much was accomplished because I didn't really try. And there are other examples of that where more detailed retrieval work. But just an indication. Nature spirits. My life has become pretty involved with nature spirits, elementals, in the last few years, and partly through the manifestation of my garden, the garden of which I serve, in which I serve, in which we serve. And certainly was intellectually and spiritually aware of the functions of fairies, elves, devas, for many years through the books of the Findhorn community and others, Pelandra, and theosophists like Dora Van Gelder and Jeffrey Hodgson. And that slowly moved into interacting myself, being a conscious interactor with nature spirits. Plenty of them in the house here, elementals. There's a house spirit that runs the show like a butler. Very good he is too, Eric. Very, very good. Helps with all kinds of problems. And they can do that, especially if you ask. And lots of elementals in the garden. There's one in almost every room, and they sort of like assistant house spirits, or whatever. They've all got a purpose. They all feel fulfilled by their purpose. They're young souls, if you like. They have the problems of young souls, elevated sense of their own importance. Have to be somewhat dictated to by a more senior member. Eric keeps them all in line, and sometimes I have to do it. They just get silly and, look at me, like kids do, So just to, give that as an example, and I've made the point before that we have to, as humans, expanding our understanding and our potential, making friends and making peace with the elementals and nature spirits generally is something we should be doing. Just as our alien visitors have to be encountered consciously and interacted with on some level. And so that we move toward that realization of the brotherhood of all sentient beings. Not just a brotherhood of man, brotherhood of all sentient beings. Now, I see a lot of people in my neighborhood really working on their brotherhood with domestic pets, particularly dogs. And that's nothing new, of course, but it is the same thing on another level. They recognize that dogs are, they might not use this, sensitive souls. I would say sentient beings, but sensitive souls is good too. And people don't walk their cats, but you can tell if you see one sitting on a porch and somebody petting it that they're doing the same thing. And they're treating them as almost as equals. Just as we learn to do with children as they mature into adulthood and take responsibility for their behavior and their actions, we treat them as equals. And basically I'm just adding that to, fairies, elementals, devas, and beings from other planetary systems who seem technologically very superior, of course, but need to be embraced as brothers in, well, I don't know, Christians would say brothers in Christ. I would say brothers in eternal sentience. doesn't really matter what phraseology you use, it amounts to the same thing. And others in the more environmental movement tend to want to see the nature and all her manifestations, whether it be forests, large bodies of water, mountains, wheat fields. They want that to be recognized as very important and part of the ecosphere that has to be loved and protected. Again, they're seeing the sentience in everything and understanding that it's, well, they feel it's a precious balance. I don't think it's quite as on edge as they do, but, you know, we all have different takes on this. But certainly with forest fires and floods and, you know, volcanoes and tornadoes and whatnot, we are constantly reminded of the, you know, the creative destructive cycle. And I do feel that some environmentalists are concentrating rather too much on the destructive cycle and not on the creative angle of the rise and fall. But again, that's could be just seen as a difference of opinion. Am I interacting with nature spirits now? No, I have interacted with devas. There's a lot of them, etheric beings on the physical plane. There's one that I've encountered several times. It hangs over Lake Ontario, which is one of the Great Lakes that bounds Ontario to the south and New York State and other American places to the north. And we share that lake. And that lake embraces several cities on its edge, particularly Toronto, a very large city with extensive suburbs, with millions of people, all of us very close to that lake, even the ones that maybe live in a high-rise apartment 5 miles north of the lake. And in my experience of that entity, that deva, is that one of its many functions is to balance the seemingly contradictory energies of the city dwellers and the nature, the fish and the birds that live in and around the lake. And it seems to do that with great ease. And lots of practice, I guess, lots of practice. I've also met some of the devas over the Rocky Mountains, which stretch up from the States into Canada, and all mountain ranges have devas. All large, cottage country here in southern Ontario has a large deva. You know, they balance energies, is what they do. And there's a lot of energies in nature and man that are not always in sync. And because of ego desires and fulfillment of ambitions and whatnot, agendas, pursuing your agenda to the exclusion of other agendas, and it helps if we as human beings, evolving human beings, recognize that need to make that balance, to strive toward that balance. And I'm perhaps not saying very little that's new here, but I just wanted to emphasize that. And although I had projected to the various levels of the astral in part 1, I'm now hanging out over the lake. I just projected there a minute ago. You just go whizzing across the water, and the devas, you'll find him. It's him or her. It's not a him or a her, but it's a being up there, hovering. There's a great hovering thing goes on. And majestic being, as they are. In an earlier video some years ago, I showed the artwork, colored paintings in Jeffrey Hodgson's Kingdom of the Gods, where there are several paintings of his perception of various devas around the world. Colorful, wonderfully geometric sort of designs. And of course, Davis can, are they who we see them as, or are we projecting our assumptions and desires onto the sort of focus of energy, the multidimensional focus of energy that they are? Other writers have pursued this problem, or this issue. It's not easily resolvable because of the whole nature of perception, and how we interpret our perception, and how our perceptions are influenced by cultural assumptions. And of course, many humans do not have cultural assumptions about what Davis look like, but those of us that do tend to project those assumptions. And I think what we're taking is part of the being and focusing on it, not the whole thing. I remember contacting many years ago the spirit of Gautama Buddha, and he said, it's in one of my second book, I think. He says, you've contacted part of me, but not all of me. But that's a good start, he said. Is it a he? No, it's not a he. Of course, it's not a he. And we tend to see partial rather than whole. And I sense that when we see whole, it's probably going to be like a very complex, detailed puzzle in which various bits will be not easy to describe because the overall is so big and complicated. As they say in Zen, there's the one and there's the 10,000 things. Try to describe 14 of the 10,000 things. Well, don't bother. It's too difficult. Just focus on the one and see the harmonious interaction of all the 10,000 things. And when I say harmonious, I mean destructive as well as creative activity. That is a harmony to be perceived in all, I was going to say human activity, but we'll say sentient activity, whether it's, how shall I say, industrial, military, warlike. There's a harmony there. There's always a harmony between the dead and the living, and the desires that bind them and push them apart. And you look at it long enough, you can see that what pushes us apart is the same thing that binds us. It's the flip of the coin, Push, pull. I push you away, I draw you near. And enemies. They push each other away and they draw each other near. And it goes on, powered by anger and hatred and desire for vengeance. And, I don't need to name names, you know what I'm talking about. And you can see yourself, if you're looking at past lives, when you were a warrior, a defender, a trickster. You can see yourself in them. Just because you're not a warrior now doesn't mean you have the right to judge those that are warriors. They're manifesting many of the same desires that you may have manifested 500, 1,000 years ago. Just as when we go out of body, fairly naturally, as we do at this point in our evolution, whether you remember it or not, sometimes it's a complex, sort of faded, lucid dream that you'll remember, and sometimes it's much more vivid and detailed. But, the ancient Egyptians practiced that stuff too. And the mystery schools in Greece did the same thing. Not as much as I suspect, because of various religious and political pressures not to. But I know when I was a Christian, well, quote-unquote Celtic Christian sort of minister guy in post-Christian Britain, 600, 700, 800, 900 AD, I was still very much a pagan who practiced out-of-body stuff, just didn't talk about it very much. And it wasn't that wise. You had to be careful who you spoke about these things to. Mysticism's always been like that. You have to be, tender and careful with people's fears and urge to judge. You have to be very careful. You talk too much about angels and they think you're talking about demons. And they suspect you're talking about demons and describing them as angels. And it's, a delicate issue. So back to the Deva. I would advise, if advice is what you want, embrace the Deva in any way that you perceive it and discover it. And don't waste your energies criticizing your partial perception. Just embrace your partial perception and watch it grow over time, as it were. If you want to use a human example, start off by kissing the fingertips of your lover, the beloved, and maybe kissing the hand, and then stroking the forearm. You spread out as you go. You don't have to start off naked, writhing. And I guess I could add to that, before you even kiss the fingertips of the beloved, you're going to allow your auras to merge to some degree. That's usually the first thing that happens, even if you don't know it. And the aura of my partial astral being that's out there is currently embracing the energy aura of the Deva, which is huge, much, much bigger than mine. Energy auras of Devas can spread over miles. And it's darn near impossible to figure out where they stop and where they start. Although other explorers may have finessed that one on me. I don't know. We understand that they're an integral part of life on Gaia. And I think we accept that as those on the inner journey. Just as maybe more conventional churchgoers would embrace the notion of angels as a big part of the life on earth. It often devolves into language, language issues. Are Devas angels? They're a type of angel. Yes. And but it's always wise not to, force one's definitions on others if they, sensitize yourself to their definitions and just go with that. In embracing this large aura with my smaller aura over the lake, I am treading on the edges of bliss here. I can't get too blissful, else I can't do the video. I'll just disappear into the bliss, which is all very well, but I'm reporting, reportage. So, part of me is there, and part of me is here talking to you, and part of me is exploring the upper astral. Okay, where are we? It's a place where devotion to prophets like Christ and Muhammad and Krishna and the other gods of our era goes on unrelenting. On lower levels of the astral, people worship their chosen God and their preferred prophet, but go about their regular earth-like lives as well. It's sort of like going to church. I mean, they might go to church a little more often, but because they don't have to work. So, but as they move on up in terms of shedding personal desires and ambitions and moving more into the greater being, which for them is often about devotion. Devotion to the Godhead, if you like, and how they would interpret it. They become more selfless. They become more, I'd even say self-sacrificing. They shake themselves free of ego desires and just become more devoted. And on the upper levels, there's a lot of devotion. There's a lot of singing praises. There's a lot of praying. There's a lot of ritual meditation. And obviously, they raise their vibration greatly by doing so. When you shed personal cares and all that vanity and selfishness and ego, even if that selfishness is painted over with compassion, as in kindness, as it often is, you know, the selfishness that wants to say, oh, look how compassionate I am. Once that is slowly shed, and you can turn your love for self and, you know, the beloved, the family, and many people do deeply love their families, no question about that, when you can spread that out to the greater family of humanity and, of course, brotherhood of sentient beings, as I mentioned in part 1, you move on up. You vibrate faster. You get way less thick and way more thin and translucent and cloud-like and barely there. And there's often a movement on these upper levels where the people are singing in crystal cathedrals or meditating in silence in huge temples or praying together. They get to that level, and there's a lot of people kind of barely being in the astral body at all and moving out into a sort of blissful invisibility. And there's often a resistance to that because they see how they can give up their personality and their definition and become, you know, this invisible, radiant, transparent being. But there's a fear. There's a fear of losing the self. They don't realize that they're actually gaining the real self, not losing it. And sometimes I'm there. I'm there now, watching what's going on. And people like myself, and maybe you too, can help them in that transition. Lose that fear of, hey, I've got no form. Hey, I've got no personality. Hey, what about me? Where's it all going to go? Am I never going to come back? Am I disappearing into nothingness? Well, you are sort of disappearing into a blissful nothingness, but you can come back. There's none of getting lost forever. Not unless you really want to. It's more like experiencing it for the joy and bliss of experiencing it and realizing that's a truer part of your being than the being that is in some kind of form. You're, you know, a cloud of intelligent energy, a cloud of radiant wisdom that understands what's going on this planet, in this galaxy. You get the basic thrust of what's going on. Evolution of form, evolution of intelligence into wisdom, the evolution of wisdom into understanding, the evolution of understanding into knowing, then the evolution of knowing into not wanting to do anything. Because that's one of the biggest traps of vanity, wanting to do stuff, wanting to make the world a better place. I mean, you can do it, but it's a trap. It's a vanity trap. And I'm thinking here of Devas I've encountered that will talk or communicate about making planetary systems and trying to make them better than the last one, because they never get it all right. There's always something not quite right. and they've been at it for a long while. They're the planners of planets. They're the builders of molecular structure, if you like. And there's a fair bit of talk, which I've included in my upcoming memoir, moving through many dimensions, as we are doing, and it's good to understand that many devas, planetary structure type devas, think about these things and they joke about them, and you might be astral traveling in an alpine valley, to use a familiar image, and you will think of the perfection of it all. And I'm not going to deny that, but I think devas often think, oh, we could do that even better. I'm sure we could. And whether you're talking about miles of packed snow or acres of melting snow, again, another creative, destructive cycle. So just to keep that in mind. As I mentioned, the Astral Valley part of me Alpine Valley was hovering over one. There's many in Switzerland that I like to go to. They're exquisitely beautiful. And the vibrations of the devas that guide the energies of mountain passes and mountain ranges is too blissful to even be verbalized, but it's there and you can feel it when you go. And part of me feels that right now, but again, I'm reporting. If I feel it deeply, I'm not going to be able to talk about it. So one touches the hem of the goddess and realizes that the hem leads to the dress and the cloak and the hat. Sometimes I feel like as I'm doing this, I should be playing religious music, and that helps. I might do it some other time. Choir music is especially helpful in this matter. But again, it ties you to, one sort of religious outlook. And although it's a beautiful religious outlook, it still sort of defines things a little tightly. The immersion in the multidimensional nature of the now as it passes from second to second is perhaps even more refined than meditating. Although, again, usual metaphysical debate here. But I think it's plain what I'm talking about here. To live in the moment as it passes, aware of as much of the manifestations within that moment, whether it be, the peacefulness of furniture, the joyfulness of elementals, or the serenity of the plant life in one's garden. And my garden's just over there. And the harmonious serenity of those trees and bushes and flowers is quite something. And I avail myself of it as often as possible, and maybe even in a few hours. So there's a little more of what one can do when out of body at night, and part 2, and we'll get to part 3 fairly soon. All this dashing about in giddy foolishness. And until part 3, I bid you farewell.